At 52, with her husband 3 months in the ground and $340 in a checking account she had opened in her own name for the first time in 2 decades, Irene Dempsey drove 11 hours south from Portland to a coastal town she hadn't visited in 14 years, carrying the deed to a boatyard her stepfather had left her in his will. The lawyers for her half-brother Craig had already called twice. The boatyard, they said, was worthless, rotted through. An environmental liability if she was being honest with herself. They had a buyer lined up who would take it off her hands for almost nothing. And wasn't that generous, all things considered? Irene didn't call them back. She packed a duffel bag, her nursing certification folder, and the photograph from her stepfather's funeral. The one where Stuart Bellamy stood in front of his workshop in his old canvas apron, squinting into the Oregon sun and grinning like a man who had everything he needed, and she drove south to Grays Inlet. Stuart Bellamy was not her father by blood. He was the man who had married her mother when Irene was 7. The man who taught her to tie a bowline knot and read tide charts and check the weather before trusting the water with your life. He had one biological son, Craig, who had left Grays Inlet at 19 with a pickup truck and a grievance against small towns and never really come back. Stuart had never spoken ill of him. He just kept working. The boatyard sat at the south end of town on a gravel spit jutting into the inlet. Bellamy Marine Works, the faded sign still said, though the paint had gone gray and the letters had started to peel at the corners. The main building was a long, low workshop, with a corrugated metal roof and wide sliding doors that faced the water. A small dock extended into the inlet, its planking warped but still solid. In the center of the workshop floor, on sawhorses, sat a wooden dinghy, 14 feet maybe, only half finished, its ribs exposed like the skeleton of something interrupted mid-breath. Irene stood in the doorway for a long time. The smell hit her first, sawdust and marine varnish, and the cold salt coming off the water. The smell of every summer she had spent here as a girl. Stuart's workbench was along the back wall, its surface worn smooth where his hands had full rested. His reading glasses were folded on a coffee can full of pencils. A half-drunk mug of tea had dried to a dark ring on the wood. He had been gone 4 months. The tea might have been 4 months old. Irene set her bag down on the floor and did not cry, not yet. She had come to decide what to do with the place. Craig's lawyers had made the offer plain. Sell now, take what little they were offering, walk away. The county assessment had valued the property at just under $9,000. A rounding error, as Craig's attorney had put it on the phone with the kind of politeness that isn't really politeness at all. Irene pulled the stool out from under the bench and sat down. If you're just finding grand stories, welcome. Hit subscribe before we go any further, because what Irene is about to find inside this workshop is the kind of thing you'll want to see through to the end. Now let's get back to her. The first morning, a man appeared at the end of the dock. He was maybe 75, broad through the shoulders even now, wearing rubber boots and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up despite the October cold. He walked the length of the dock slowly and stopped at the workshop door, where Irene was sweeping out what felt like a decade of accumulated grime. "You're Stuart's girl," he said. It wasn't a question. "Irene," she kept sweeping. "I know I look like him." He took off his cap. "Clement Adair, fished out of this inlet going on 51 years. Your father and I go back to when this dock was new planking." He looked past her at the unfinished dinghy on its sawhorses. "I heard you came down. Wasn't sure you'd stay." "I haven't decided to stay." Clement nodded the way men nod when they're not surprised by an answer they were hoping was different. He looked out at the water for a moment. "When you make up your mind," he said, "call me before you sign anything for that brother of yours." He set a folded piece of paper on the bench, a phone number in handwriting that shook a little at the edges. Then he turned to go, and stopped. "Did Stuart ever tell you," he said, not turning around, "what he was really doing out here all those years?" "He fixed boats," Irene said. Clement was quiet for a beat too long. "Yeah," he said finally, "he did that too," and he walked back down the dock. Irene stood still after he was gone. The inlet moved outside the open doors. The unfinished dinghy waited on its sawhorses. She looked at the phone number on the bench and could not explain why her chest had gone tight. She spent the next 2 days cleaning. She told herself it was to make the place presentable for a sale. The truth was that every time she picked up her phone to call a realtor, she set it back down. She swept the workshop floor and scrubbed the windows until the afternoon light came through clean. She oiled the hinges on the sliding doors. She found a jar of coffee in the cabinet and made a pot on the old electric burner and drank it standing at the bench looking out at the inlet. The smell of coffee and salt and sawdust made the workshop feel less like a place that had been abandoned and more like a place that was simply waiting. On the second afternoon, she crawled under the workbench to clean the floor beneath it. Her hand hit something solid where there should have been only floorboard. A panel about the size of a bread box, set flush with the planking and painted the same gray-green as everything else. The dust on it was thinner than the dust on everything around it, worn away by hands that had come back to this spot many times over many years. 8 screws. Irene found the screwdriver in the tool drawer. The panel came up with a soft scrape of old wood. Inside was a flat compartment, maybe 4 inches deep, lined with oilcloth against the damp, and inside that compartment, a ledger, leather cover thick, the pages swollen with years of coastal air, a tin box with the lid sealed with electrical tape, a bundle of envelopes tied with jute twine so old it had gone gray. Irene sat cross-legged on the workshop floor and opened the ledger. Stuart Bellamy's handwriting filled every page. She had known that handwriting her whole life, the neat, upright print of a man who had taught himself to write carefully because he wanted to be understood. But these were not repair invoices or parts orders. October 3, Danny Reeves, engine seized, couldn't afford parts, pulled the motor, rebuilt it, sourced the bearing myself. 2 days work, no charge. February 14, Anita Solis, lost her husband last August. Hull breach, boat would have sat all season, patched and recaulked, no charge. June 19, the Whitfield boy, 19, first boat, couldn't make the payment on the repair. Fixed the prop shaft, no charge. Page after page, 31 years, hundreds of entries, and beside almost everyone in the right margin in a different ink, added later as if he had gone back through the book periodically to check. Stuart had written 2 words. Still fishing. He had kept track not of what people owed him, but of whether they were still out there on the water. Whether they had made it. Irene read those 2 words over and over until the light outside changed color. She opened the tin box. Last inside were photographs. A man holding up a king salmon, grinning beside a freshly painted boat, a woman with 3 children on a dock, a hand-drawn card in a child's crayon, letters spelling "Thank you more Bellamy" with a wobbly yellow sun above a blue boat. And at the bottom of the tin, a note folded in quarters in Stuart's handwriting, undated. Irene, if you found this, you came back. I always knew you would. I never talked about any of this because it wasn't the kind of thing that needs talking about. It just needs doing. You don't have to carry it on. But if you ever want to, you'll know what to do. Everything you need is right here, Dad. He had called himself Dad on a piece of paper in a way he had never quite managed to say out loud in 30 years, of showing up every time she needed him to. Irene sat on the floor of that workshop with the note in both hands until the light outside went the pale orange of late afternoon. And she cried, not for herself, not for what the last 4 years had cost her, but for a man she realized she had loved completely and known only in pieces. What came next, when the whole town started arriving at that dock, is what finally showed Irene what she had actually inherited. Word in Grays Inlet moves the way it always moves in small fishing towns, across back fences and at the hardware counter and over VHF radio channels that everyone monitors and no one admits to. By the end of the first week, people started coming to the dock. Anita Solis came first, in a truck with a casserole dish wrapped in a dish towel. She was about 60, with the direct, unhurried gaze of a woman who has spent decades reading water. "Your father fixed my boat the winter I thought I was going to lose everything," she said. She set the casserole on the bench without being asked. "I brought him a dish every Thanksgiving since. Guess now there's you." Danny Reeves came the next morning with a box of stainless marine hardware, still in the packaging. "I got my footing in this business because of Stuart," he said. "If you're going to finish that dinghy, you'll want these." He looked at the half-built hull. He was building it for the Whitfield family. For the daughter. She's 12 now. He wanted her to have it before she got too old to think boats were interesting. They kept coming. A retired shipwright named Holbrook who showed up one afternoon and just quietly began sanding the dinghy's hull without asking permission. A woman named Greta who left jars of jam with a note that said, "Stuart talked about you all the time." Clement Adair came every evening, sat on an upturned bucket, drank Irene's coffee, and told her the stories the ledger didn't hold. The night Stewart had driven his own truck 40 miles in a February storm to tow a family's boat off a sandbar. The time he had quietly paid the fuel bill for a crew, too proud to ask for help, and told the harbor master it was an accounting error. He used to say. Clement told her one evening, the lamp making the lines in his face deeper than they were, that the only help worth giving is the kind where the person can't figure out how to pay you back, because then they have to pay someone else forward instead. That way, it doesn't stop with you. Irene stopped thinking about selling. She didn't say so to anyone, she just stopped. Then, on a Thursday morning in the third week, a silver Mercedes turned into the gravel lot. Craig Bellamy climbed out wearing clothes that had no business within 50 miles of a working waterfront. He was 54, lean, with the smooth confidence of a man who had learned to be the most important person in every room he entered. He smiled with all of his teeth. Irene, good to see you. Glad you're getting the place cleaned up. He looked around the workshop with the expression of someone calculating square footage. My attorney says we need to move on this. There's a buyer lined up and they won't wait indefinitely. I'm not selling, Irene said. Craig's smile held. I think you'll want to talk to a lawyer before you say that. There's a partnership agreement, signed by Stewart notarized, giving me a 40% stake in this property, which means you can't transfer without my consent, and I need yours to sell. We're stuck unless we both agree to move. He set a document on the bench. Take your time with it, but don't take too long. He was already moving toward the door when Irene said, I'll read it carefully. That night, she spread the document under the good light at the workbench. She had spent 22 years as a nurse, 14 of those in home health, which meant documentation, reading discharge summaries and care plans and physician orders, finding the single line where what was written didn't match what was true. Her ex-husband had spent years calling that skill just keeping notes. She had never argued with him about it. She was not married to him anymore. She went through the partnership agreement line by line. Then she went through every real document in Stewart's files. Going back decades, his genuine signature had one constant. The capital B in Bellamy curved inward at the base, a small leftward hook that was pure muscle memory, the habit of a man who had learned his letters from a particular teacher in a particular classroom. The B on Craig's agreement stood straight, and the notary seal bore a date that, when she checked the county records online, corresponded to a period when that notary's commission had lapsed by nearly a year. The document was forged, not even carefully done. She called Clement Adair that night. He was there in 20 minutes, and when he saw the agreement, his face went the color of old rope. You need to call the county sheriff, he said. Tomorrow, Irene said. Tonight I need to make some calls first. She called Danny Reeves. She called Anita Solis. She called Holbrook and Greta, and the harbor master, and 6 more names she had gathered in 3 weeks of people arriving at the dock with casseroles and hardware and stories about her stepfather. She asked each of them if they would come to the workshop on Saturday morning. 31 people came. When Craig arrived with his attorney at 10 o'clock, expecting a woman alone and frightened, he found Irene sitting behind her stepfather's workbench with a folder, a printed copy of the county notary records, and a handwriting comparison she had laid out with the careful, methodical attention that 22 years of nursing documentation trains into your hands. 31 people stood behind her. This signature is forged, Irene said. Her voice did not shake. She laid the comparison on the bench. The notary seal is from a commission that had been expired for 11 months. I filed a report with the county sheriff this morning. She opened the ledger and set it beside the document. And this is what you tried to take. 31 years, 240 names, people in this room. She looked at Craig directly. You want to take me to court? Go ahead. But you will have to explain to a jury in this county why you forged your father's signature to steal from the woman he called his daughter. Craig's attorney put a hand on Craig's arm, looked around the workshop at 31 silent faces. The fisherman, the harbor master, the retired shipwright with sawdust still on his cuffs. And he understood, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, that there are things which appear on no balance sheet, and that those things were the reason he had never once been able to build what his father had built in this town over 50 years. The attorney withdrew the partnership claim in writing before noon. The criminal complaint for document fraud was not withdrawn. Craig Bellamy left Grays Inlet before the week was out and did not come back. November came in cold and fast off the Pacific the way it does on the Oregon coast. Not gradually, all at once, like a door closing, but by then the workshop was not the place Irene had found in October. Holbrook finished sanding the dinghy's hull. Danny installed the fittings he had brought. Irene learned from Clement how to read the grain of the wood her stepfather had chosen, how to feel in the hull whether the work was right. Her hands went rough. Nobody told her that was something to be ashamed of. She had forgotten, somewhere in the years of her marriage, how good it felt to spend a day making something instead of losing it. On the last Saturday of November, she and Holbrook and Danny carried the finished dinghy down to the dock and set it in the water. It floated even and clean and white, with a green stripe along the waterline in the same colors. Stuart had put on every boat he ever loved. They rowed it down to the Whitfield house that afternoon. The daughter, Cassie, 12 years old, came down to the dock in her rubber boots and stood with her hands at her sides and looked at the boat the way children look at things they want very much and haven't yet let themselves want. "It's yours," Irene said. "Stuart Bellamy started building it for you. I just finished it." Cassie was quiet for a moment. "I never met him," she said. "He knew your dad," Irene said. "That was enough for him." The girl took the bowline from Irene's hands and tied it to the dock cleat with a half hitch. Someone had already taught her and taught her well. She was going to be fine. Winter settled over Grays Inlet. The workshop was warm. The ledger sat open on the bench where Irene kept it now, not hidden, not locked away. She had added 6 new entries since October. Each one ended the same way Stuart's had: a name, a date, what needed doing, and in the right margin of each entry she left a blank space to fill in later, when enough time had passed to know. Still fishing. One evening in December she drove down the coast to check on a woman she had heard about through the harbor master. About 50. Recently widowed, her husband's boat impounded for unpaid fees she was struggling to contest on her own. Her name was Judith. She was sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee she had let go cold, staring at a stack of papers with the exact expression Irene recognized from her own mirror in the weeks after her husband had died. "I heard you help people," Judith said. "I'm working on it," Irene said. She stayed 3 hours. She went through the impound paperwork line by line, the way she had learned to go through care plans, looking for the place where what was written didn't match what was true. There were fees applied in error, a timeline that didn't hold up under scrutiny. Not fraud, just the ordinary carelessness of an overburdened system. Irene wrote it all down in her careful hand and told Judith who to call and exactly what to say. Before she left, Judith asked, "What do I owe you?" Irene thought of Stuart Bellamy in his canvas apron, squinting into the Oregon sun. "Nothing," she said. "But someday, somebody is going to come to you who needs what you know. When that day comes, you give it to them for free. That's how it works out here." Judith looked at her across the table. "My stepfather told me that," Irene said. "He told me the only help worth giving is the kind where the person can't figure out how to pay you back, because then they have to pay someone else forward instead, and that way it doesn't stop with you." She drove back to Grays Inlet in the dark, along the coast road where the ocean was a black sound to the west, and the lights of the inlet came on ahead of her, one by one, like something trying to guide her home. Back at the workshop, she opened the ledger to the first blank page after the last entry. She picked up the pencil, Stuart's pencil still in the coffee can on the bench, and wrote a new entry, a name, a date, what she had found, what she had done. Then she set the pencil down and looked at the right margin, the space she left blank in every entry, for the 2 words she would go back and fill in later. She left it empty for now. It was too soon to know, but she believed she would be going back. Her stepfather had done this for 31 years and never told a soul. He had kept this book not as a record of debts, but as proof that the world could work the way he believed it should. Quietly, without credit, with hands that asked for nothing back. Irene Dempsey was 52 years old. She had $340 and a nursing license and a workshop that smelled like sawdust and salt and the particular silence of work done honestly. She was only just beginning. Maybe that is the thing worth carrying out of this story. We spend so much of our lives measuring what we have, the house, the balance, the name on the account, that we miss the only ledger that ever actually lasts. Stuart Bellamy never had much of the first kind of wealth. But when his daughter walked into that workshop alone, and frightened and not sure she had anywhere left to go, 240 people in that county knew his name because of what he had quietly done for them. That is the inheritance that no court, no brother, no man in an expensive coat can ever take. So before you go, think about one person you know who is sitting somewhere tonight with a cup of coffee, gone cold, and a stack of papers that feels like the end of something. Maybe all they need is someone to sit across the table and go through it line by line. That doesn't take money. It takes attention and the willingness to stay. That is how it begins, not in grand gestures, but in one ordinary person deciding again and again that the person in front of them is worth the time. Thank you for watching this one all the way through. If it moved you, subscribe to Grand Stories so you don't miss what comes next, and leave us a comment. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and if you've ever known someone like Stuart Bellamy, someone who helped quietly and never once asked to be remembered for it. We'd love to hear about them. We'll see you in the next story.